She wore a pristine white wedding dress, walking beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers before thousands of eyes. This should have been the most beautiful day of her life, but instead of vows, she received an indictment. Instead of a wreath, she received contempt. And instead of love, she received betrayal from the very man she trusted most. Celeste Ashford vanished after that night, without a trace, without a word of farewell. 3 years later, the world had forgotten her, but she never forgot them. If you want to know how the woman who was knocked down rose again, like this post, comment with the name of the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has progressed, and follow along to the end. The dress weighed 11 pounds. Celeste knew because she'd stood on the scale twice that morning. Once at 5 a.m., in the gray dark of the hotel suite when sleep had stopped being a realistic option, and once with Priya, who'd laughed and grabbed her by the shoulders and told her the number was meaningless, that the dress was extraordinary, that today was going to be the kind of day people talked about for decades. Celeste had smiled. She'd nodded. She'd said exactly nothing about the thing living behind her ribs. Not butterflies. Nothing as light as that. Something heavier. Something with weight and temperature to it. A fist pressing outward from the inside. And she'd had it for 2 days and she could not explain it, and she had stopped trying. The Grand Meridian Ballroom held 400 people. There was a cake that had been flown in from Lyon in a temperature-controlled container. There was a string quartet she'd never heard rehearse because every rehearsal had been scheduled by Vivian Cross, and every schedule had been delivered to Celeste the way you deliver information to someone whose input is not actually being solicited. There were peonies, white, controlled, scentless in the way of flowers that have been refrigerated too long. Because Vivian had chosen the peonies and Celeste had approved them by not objecting, which was how most decisions in the last 8 months had been made. She had wanted wildflowers. She hadn't said so to anyone. Priya appeared in the suite doorway at 1:15 with a glass of water and an expression Celeste recognized from 11 years of friendship. The face Priya made when she was about to say something she'd been sitting on for too long. "Your father's in the hall." "I know. He's been standing out there for 20 minutes. Tell him 5. Priya left without arguing, which meant she'd seen the expression on Celeste's face and made a tactical decision. Smart woman, Priya. Always had been. Celeste turned back to the mirror. The reflection looked composed. She'd spent years building that composure. The set of the jaw, the shoulders rolled back and down, the eyes that stayed level when everything behind them was cycling through frequencies nobody was supposed to see. Her mother had taught her that. Hold yourself like the room is watching. The room is always watching. Her mother had died when Celeste was 19 and had left her 2 things. A vintage pearl necklace Celeste wore exactly once a year, and this instruction, which she had been following every day since. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist and counted without thinking about it. Fast pulse. Not racing, just fast. She picked up the bouquet, white peonies and eucalyptus trailing from the bottom. The same arrangement Vivian had specified in an email that began, "Dear Celeste, I've taken the liberty," which was a sentence Celeste had come to understand as meaning, "I've made a decision and I'm informing you after the fact." She had not taken the liberty of mentioning the wildflowers. She had not taken any liberties at all. That had seemed 8 months ago like a reasonable accommodation. It seemed now like something else. Gerald Ashford entered rooms the way weather entered rooms. You felt the pressure shift before you saw him. He was 61 and had been handsome in the way men of a certain generation and a certain income are handsome, and he still moved like someone accustomed to being the most significant person present, which in most rooms he entered was still largely accurate. He looked at his daughter in her 11-pound dress, and his face did the thing it always did when emotions inconvenienced him. It arranged itself into something that resembled tenderness, but moved too slowly, like a stage direction being followed rather than a feeling being had. "You look like your mother," he said. "Don't." He was smart enough not to push it. He crossed to the window and stood beside her, and they both looked at the Manhattan skyline the way strangers look at things they have no real claim to. "Damien's a good match," Gerald said. "You've said that. The Cross family Dad." She kept her voice flat, not cold, just final. I'm marrying him because I want to, not because of the merger. He studied her profile with the expression of a man running a private calculation. Those two things don't have to conflict. She didn't answer. Below the window, a cab horn cut through the city and dissolved. The world was moving without her, indifferent and continuous, and she had approximately 40 minutes before nothing would look the same as it did right now. She didn't know that yet. She'd know it later with the specific precision of someone who has to fix the exact moment the map changed. The corridor behind the gilded ceremony doors had its own particular smell. Flowers, candle wax, the expensive perfume of 400 people who dressed for significance. Celeste stood with her hand tucked into Gerald's arm and felt the processional music through the floor as much as through the air. The string quartet had shifted into position. The doors were the only thing between her and the rest of it. Gerald tensed beside her half a second before she heard the footsteps. A groomsman she barely knew. Brooks, who had the face of someone whose preparation had just become insufficient, came through the side door moving at the wrong speed, too fast and not fast enough at the same time. Ms. Ashford. He stopped at what he probably thought was a respectful distance. Damien needs to speak with you. Before. He said privately. Gerald started something. Celeste let go of his arm. Where is he? Damien Cross was in the groom's anteroom in his tuxedo, and he looked exactly like himself. Square jaw, composed, the kind of frame that suggested athleticism maintained as a professional discipline. Except his eyes were wrong. She saw it the moment she came through the door. His eyes had the quality of a verdict. Not confidence. Not even anger. Certainty, the kind that comes after a decision has been made and the making of it is already behind you. 3 other people were in the room. Marcus, his brother, seated with his arms crossed and his face doing something careful and controlled. Raymond Cross, Damien's uncle, standing at the window with a folder in his hands. A man she had always read as someone who understood power so thoroughly he didn't need to perform it. And Vivienne, positioned directly behind her son with her hands folded in front of her, immovable as carved stone. The hair on Celeste's arms rose. Damien. She checked the time on reflex. We have 90 seconds. I need you to explain something. He said her name the way you say the name of a problem you've already decided the answer to, but feel compelled to document anyway. She looked at the folder in Raymond's hands. What is that? Raymond stepped forward and placed it on the small table between them with the deliberation of a man completing a choreographed sequence. Damien nodded at it. Not opening it felt worse than opening it. She opened it. Financial records. Transfer documentation. Her name on 3 pages, attached to transactions totaling just over $4 million, routed through a shell company she had never heard of into an account she had never seen. The dates mapped onto 8 months of her professional life with a precision that made her stomach drop before her mind caught up to what she was actually looking at. The precision was the tell. Real fraud is messy. This was too clean. This was the work of someone who had studied her. Her blood ran cold enough she felt it in her back teeth. This is forged, she said. The forensic accountant. Then your forensic accountant is either incompetent or bought. She looked up at him. Not at Raymond, not at Vivienne. At Damien, because Damien was the one who needed to look at her. Look at me. This is not real. Someone constructed this. Someone who had access to my financial history and knew exactly how to mimic it. His jaw worked. The muscle below his ear flexed and released. She watched his eyes, and she saw it, thin as a wire, almost not there, a splinter of doubt. The question he actually wanted to ask. And then Vivienne spoke. The guests are waiting, Vivienne said. Whatever Celeste needs to say, she can say it to our attorney. Mom, the guests are waiting, Damien. And that was the moment. Not the folder, not the documents, not even Damien's expression. That was the moment Celeste understood what was happening. All of it, the full architecture. The way you understand something when the lights come on and the room is exactly what you suspected, and worse. Vivienne wanted the guests waiting. Vivienne wanted 400 people in their seats. Whatever was about to happen was not going to happen in this anteroom. It was going to happen out there, in public. with witnesses and photographers and the social weight of a room that contained every significant person in both their professional worlds. Celeste closed the folder. She looked at Damien and said quietly, "Don't do this." He couldn't hold her eyes. She walked out. The processional was playing when the doors opened. 400 people rose. The chandeliers scattered light across the room in patterns that had looked beautiful in the promotional photographs and looked now, to Celeste, like the interior of something that had been designed to trap. She walked the aisle because stopping in the middle of it would have been worse. She walked straight-spined, both hands around the bouquet to stop them shaking, and she made it to the altar before Damien turned to face the room instead of her. She watched him reach into his jacket. She knew, and still the knowledge didn't protect her from what knowing actually felt like. He withdrew a single folded page. His voice, when he spoke into the microphone, was controlled in the way that power is controlled. Fully, with nothing wasted, nothing accidental. "Before we begin," he said, "I have a responsibility to this family, and to everyone in this room, to say something that cannot wait." The murmur that moved through the crowd had texture. Celeste heard it the way you hear static, not the individual sounds, but the frequency. "I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing evidence that has fundamentally changed my understanding of the woman standing beside me." He didn't look at her. He looked at the room, at board members and family friends and journalists and people who were here because proximity to the cross name was itself a form of currency. "The evidence demonstrates a pattern of financial fraud and corporate espionage carried out against my family's company. The accounts are documented, the transfers are verified, the person responsible is Celeste Ashford." The room detonated in the way that rooms full of trained, powerful people detonate, not loudly, but completely. The intake of breath across 400 people is not a small thing. The shift and recalibration, the immediate calculation of what this moment meant for everyone present. She heard all of it, felt it in the changed air pressure of the space. She stood still. She had thought, all the way down the aisle, that she would say something, that some part of her would produce words proportional to a moment this large. What she found instead was a stillness so complete it frightened her. Not paralysis, something colder and more deliberate. She stood in her 11-pound dress under the crystal chandeliers, and she looked at the man she had agreed to marry, who was reading from a sheet of paper in a measured voice, while his uncle added details when prompted, while his mother stood to one side with the expression of someone watching a project reach its final stage. And she counted. 4 minutes. She counted because her mind needed something to do, and counting kept it from doing other things. In the third row, Priya had her hand over her mouth. In the front row, Gerald Ashford sat with his eyes forward and his face carefully, deliberately blank in a way that Celeste recognized from a lifetime of watching him and filed into the part of her mind she kept for things she was going to deal with later. When it was done, Damien folded the paper. "I'm calling off this wedding," he said, "and I'm asking the appropriate authorities to review what we've presented today." The photographer caught her face at the exact moment those words arrived. She felt the flash. She felt it the way you feel something that becomes permanent, not as heat, but as a ceiling, a moment closing over itself and becoming fixed in time. She set the bouquet down on the altar step, carefully. The way you set something down that you are not going to pick up again. She turned and walked back the way she had come, through the doors, down the corridor, into the elevator bank, without stopping, without turning, without giving the room or the cameras or Damien Cross or Vivian Cross the satisfaction of watching her come apart. She held it together until the elevator doors closed. Then she put her back against the wall and slid down it and sat on the elevator floor in her 11-pound dress, and breathed through her nose and pressed her palms flat against the cool metal floor because the metal was solid and real, and everything else in that moment was not. She counted her pulse. Still fast. By evening, the photographs were everywhere. The sequence, 6 frames, Damien at the microphone, the room, Celeste at the altar, was on 4 tabloid sites before dinner. The disagreement over her expression became its own story. Cold, some said. Guilty, said others. Broken, said a third category, which she found the most revealing because it told her something about what people needed her to be. Her accounts were frozen by 9 p.m. Not gradually, all at once, like a switch thrown. Her board access to the charitable foundation she co-chaired was suspended by 10. Gerald did not return her calls. Priya texted at 7. I know it wasn't real. I'm so sorry. She didn't text back. Not yet. She sat in the hotel suite with the dress hung carefully behind the bathroom door. She would not destroy it. That would mean something she wasn't willing to mean. And she went through the photograph documents on her phone with the focus of someone who understands that clarity is the only currency she has left. The forgery was sophisticated. The account structures mimicked her legitimate history too accurately. The timing mapped onto real periods of her professional life with knowledge that went beyond public records. Someone had been watching her. Not for months. Longer. At midnight, she packed a single canvas bag. Not the matched luggage Vivian had once admired. That luggage had been a performance, and the performance was done. Passport, laptop, the photographed documents. Cash she'd kept physical and separate for reasons she'd never quite been able to articulate to anyone who'd asked. She took off the jewelry. She left the dress. She walked out of the lobby in the wedding shoes because she hadn't thought to pack different ones. 3 blocks from the hotel, she bought water at a convenience store and drank half of it on the sidewalk. The heels were not built for pavement. She took them off and carried them and kept walking through the November cold with her bare feet on the city concrete, the canvas bag over her shoulder, and the vast indifferent city moving around her like she wasn't there. She should have had a plan. She knew that. But something in her, the part that had learned over 28 years to stay inside structures built by other people, that part had gone quiet tonight. What was left was something rawer and more directionless. And if she was honest with herself in the dark on a street in Manhattan with no shoes on, more honest than anything she'd felt in the past 8 months of approving peonies and nodding at seating charts. She was done being manageable. She didn't know yet what that meant. She only knew it was true. At the end of the block, a car pulled to the curb. Not aggressively, the quiet pull of someone who knows how to do things without looking like they're doing them. The window came down, and a man she didn't know, late 40s, close-cut gray hair, the specific neutral expression of someone in a professional capacity, looked at her with the recognition of someone who'd been sent to find her specifically. Ms. Ashford. Every muscle in her body went rigid. I'm not getting in a car with someone I don't know. My employer would like to offer assistance. Your employer can offer it through a formal channel. The man reached into his jacket and produced a card and held it through the window without extending it far enough to require her to step forward. She didn't take it. Not yet. He asked me to tell you, the man said, that the documents were forged by 2 people inside the Cross family. He said to tell you he can prove it. He said if you walk away tonight without hearing him out, the people who did this will never face what they've earned. The wind came off the avenue. The concrete was cold under her feet. She stood there with her wedding shoes in one hand and her canvas bag on her shoulder, and she looked at the card, and she thought about the folder on the anteroom table and the precision of it and the scope of what it had taken to construct and how long someone must have been building it. She thought about Priya's text. I know it wasn't real. She thought about Gerald's face, the careful blankness. Who is your employer? She said. The man said a name she had never heard. Lucien Draven. She reached out and took the card. She did not get in the car. Tell your employer I want to see the proof first. Before a meeting, before anything else. Proof. The man nodded once. He expected that. The window went up. The car pulled away. She stood on the sidewalk with the card in her hand and the name on it, and the city enormous and indifferent around her. And somewhere behind her, the Grand Meridian still lit, and the life she'd built dissolving in real time into litigation and tabloid cycles, and the patient satisfaction of people who had planned very carefully for exactly this outcome. She looked at the name one more time. Lucien Draven. She put the card in her pocket. She kept walking. She had no way of knowing, barefoot on November pavement with nothing left, that the card in her pocket was the first piece of the rest of her life. She had no way of knowing about the years ahead, the discipline, the transformation, the slow and exacting work of becoming someone the world would not be able to dismiss or destroy or reduce to 6 photographs taken at the worst moment she'd ever lived through. She knew none of that. She only knew one thing with the particular certainty of a woman standing in the wreckage of everything she'd been told to want. The people who had done this to her believed they had finished her. They had made a serious mistake. And somewhere in the grid of this enormous city, in an office or a car or a room she couldn't yet picture, a man named Lucian Draven was waiting to prove it. And Celeste Ashford, barefoot and furious and completely, dangerously clear-eyed, was about to make the most important phone call of her life. She found the diner 4 blocks from where the car had pulled away. 24-hour place on the corner of 9th and something she didn't catch, the kind of establishment that exists in every city as a monument to people who have nowhere better to be and no particular interest in pretending otherwise. Formica counters. Fluorescent light that made everyone look like they were recovering from something. A cook behind the pass-through who hadn't looked up when the bell above the door rang and showed no signs of starting. Celeste sat at the far end of the counter with her back to the wall and her canvas bag between her feet and the card face up in front of her coffee mug. Lucienne Draven. No title, no company, just a phone number in small clean type on cardstock that was heavier than standard, the kind of weight that communicates, without saying anything, that the person who'd had it made didn't need to explain themselves to anyone. She turned it over. Blank on the back. The coffee was bad in the specific way diner coffee at midnight is bad. Too hot, too acidic, functional rather than pleasurable, designed for survival rather than enjoyment. She drank it anyway and looked at the card and tried to think in straight lines, which had always been her strongest skill and which was currently operating under conditions it had not been engineered for. What she knew, the documents were forged. She was certain of that, the way she was certain of things she'd staked her professional reputation on for 6 years. Not blind faith, but pattern recognition. The accumulated instinct of someone who had spent her career identifying the difference between financial records that had grown organically and financial records that had been constructed. The construction was too clean. Real money moved messily. Real fraud left traces that contradicted each other in the way that human error always contradicts itself. The forgery against her had no contradictions, which meant whoever built it understood her history well enough to anticipate every question an investigator would ask. That was not the Cross family's internal accounting team. That was someone else entirely. What she didn't know: who had commissioned it, how long it had been in construction, what the full endgame was beyond destroying her in the most public way available. She thought about Raymond placing the folder on the table. The precision of that gesture. The choreography of the entire anteroom. Marcus seated, Raymond standing, Vivian positioned directly behind Damien like a prompt he couldn't see. None of that was improvised. That had been rehearsed. And she thought about Damien's eyes, the splinter of doubt that had been there for exactly 1 moment before Vivian spoke, and the moment closed. She picked up her phone and called Gerald. 6 rings. Voicemail. Her father's recorded voice, smooth and professional, the voice he used for everyone, including his daughter. She waited for the tone and said, "I need you to call me back tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. I need to know what you knew and when you knew it, and I need you to tell me the truth, which I understand is not your default, but I'm asking you to try it." She hung up. She finished the coffee. She looked at the card. She did not call the number. Not yet. She needed sleep first, even bad sleep, because her mind was running on the specific dangerous fuel of adrenaline and humiliation and the kind of cold clarity that feels like strength but is actually the last stage before collapse. She knew the difference. She'd learned it in graduate school, and she'd relearned it every time she'd pushed past the point her body was actually capable of. She paid cash for the coffee and walked 2 blocks to a hotel she booked under her middle name, combined with her maternal grandmother's surname. A privacy habit she'd developed after a minor stalking incident 3 years ago that Gerald had called an overreaction. She paid cash for that, too. She showered with the water as hot as she could stand, and then she lay on top of the bed covers in the dark and stared at the ceiling and slept in fragments, hard and dreamless, until 6 a.m., when the light came through the curtains and her eyes opened before she'd made any conscious decision to open them. The clarity was back, sharper now. She called the number on the card. It rang twice. Ms. Ashford. Not the driver's voice. This one was different, lower, with an accent that suggested multiple countries lived inside it without any single one winning the argument. "I wondered if you'd sleep first or call first." "Where's the proof?" a pause that was considered rather than evasive. Directness. Good. That will save time. Where is it? In a location I'll share once we've spoken in person. Not to stall. Because what I'm going to show you requires context that is easier to provide in a room than across a phone line. I'm not walking into a room with you. You choose the location, public, any borough. My only requirement is that you come alone, which I suspect was your plan regardless, since your current situation has narrowed the relevant options considerably. She didn't answer that. He was correct, and she had no interest in confirming it. 10 o'clock, she said. Remy's on West 44th, corner table. I'll be there at 9:50. The line went dead. She sat on the edge of the bed and breathed for a moment. The room was beige and inoffensive and completely anonymous, which was exactly what she needed and precisely what she hated. She had spent years building a life with texture, a specific apartment, things on the walls she'd chosen herself, a coffee maker she'd had since the second year of graduate school. All of it was currently either frozen by legal action or contaminated by the fact that the people who had publicly destroyed her knew her address. She spent the rest of the morning in the hotel room with her laptop and the photographed documents and her own memory, cross-referencing every transfer, every account number, every timestamp against what she actually knew about her own financial history. She ate from the vending machine in the hallway. She did not turn on the news. She already knew what the news would say. Remy's at 9:48. Flat shoes she'd bought at a drugstore 2 blocks away. Canvas bag. The expression she defaulted to in professional settings, being neutral, attentive, the kind of face that communicated competence without invitation. He was already there. Lucian Draven was not what the name and the card and the late-night car had assembled in her head. She'd built something corporate dangerous, dark suit, practiced stillness, the deliberate calm of a man accustomed to rooms knowing he was the most hazardous thing in them. What she found was a man in his early 40s with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that looked like it had made significant decisions and lived inside their consequences, neither of which had been comfortable. Lean, well-dressed without being theatrical. His hands were around a coffee cup, and he did not stand when she arrived, which she noted without judgment in either direction. "You're younger than I expected," he said. "You're less obvious than I expected." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, an acknowledgement of a point scored. She sat, ordered coffee, waited until the waiter was gone. The proof. He reached under the table and produced a slim folder and slid it across without ceremony. She opened it. The first document was an internal communication between Raymond Cross and a private intelligence contractor registered in Delaware, parent company in the Caymans. 11 months ago. The language was careful in the way of people who believed they were being cautious, while not actually being cautious enough. A project to substantiate irregularities in the Ashford financial record in a time frame preceding the anticipated marital arrangement. The second was a payment record, a number that made the scope of this clear. The third was a secondary communication between Raymond and someone referred to only by initials, a woman, from context, discussing the specific accounts to be forged and the paper trail strategy. One line near the bottom read, "V confirms the timeline. Must be completed before the ceremony date to allow for press positioning. V. Vivian." Celeste closed the folder. She was quiet long enough that Lucian drank half his coffee without speaking, which told her something about the quality of his patience that she filed away. "How did you get these?" she said. "I have people in a number of places." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm prepared to give right now." He set down the cup. "What I can tell you is that they're authentic, that I have chain of custody documented, and that combined with what a competent forensic accountant would find given full access to the forgery, they constitute criminal exposure for Raymond Cross and potentially for Vivian. Potentially. The V reference is circumstantial without corroboration. The rest isn't. She looked out the window at 44th Street. Morning city, cabs and pedestrians, and the mechanical indifference of a place that hadn't noticed what happened to her 2 days ago. "Why?" she said. Not how. Why? He didn't pretend not to understand the question. The Cross family has financial entanglements that intersect with organizations I've been monitoring for several years. Raymond Cross specifically has been laundering money through corporate merger infrastructure, not small amounts. The merger your wedding was designed to accelerate would have moved significant capital through channels that become significantly harder to trace once a deal closes. He paused. Exposing the fraud against you is a byproduct of a larger interest. I'm telling you that directly because I think you'd find out anyway, and I'd rather not begin whatever this is with something you'd call a lie of omission. She looked at him for the first time since sitting down, held it. He didn't flinch or look away or do any of the things people did when they were performing honesty rather than practicing it. I don't know you, she said. No. I have no reason to trust you. Also accurate. And you're describing yourself as someone who runs an organization that operates in what exactly? Several industries, some exist in legal gray areas and some don't. I dismantle operations that prey on people who have no recourse through legitimate channels. I'm not a philanthropist. I'm also not someone who hurts people who haven't earned it. That distinction I maintain carefully. He said it the way someone states facts about terrain, without effect, without the need for it to land any particular way. What I'm offering you is resources, access, and time. What I want in exchange is your mind. You were trained in corporate finance, and you understand how the Cross family structures its assets from the inside. That knowledge has value to me. The coffee was going cold. She didn't notice. You want me to help you take them apart, she said. I want to understand them well enough to do that, yes. And I think you want the same thing. She should have said no. The part of her raised on formal channels, and the belief that institutions, whatever their failures, were preferable to circumventing them. That part knew she should have said no, stood up, taken his documents to a federal attorney, and trusted that the truth had sufficient force to clear her name through legitimate means. She thought about her frozen accounts, about Priya's text that she still hadn't answered, about the board of the charitable foundation suspending her access without a single phone call from a single person she'd worked alongside for 3 years. She thought about Vivian Cross standing behind her son at the altar, hands folded, project complete. 3 conditions, Celeste said. First, full access to everything you find. I'm not a resource you use and set aside. Second, my name gets cleared through legitimate evidence submitted through legitimate channels. I'm not interested in outcomes that can't survive daylight. Third, if I determine at any point that your organization has done something I can't stand next to, I walk. No retaliation. Lucienne studied her face for a moment. The first 2 are acceptable. The third I'll agree to on the condition that your determination is based on verified facts rather than rumor or discomfort. That's fair? Then we have a foundation. No handshake, no ceremony. The agreement settled between them like something that had been waiting to be acknowledged, which felt more honest than ceremony would have. The townhouse was in the upper 80s, brownstone and mature trees, the kind of building that looked like a private family home and contained, behind that exterior, a staff of 4 people who introduced themselves by first name and treated her presence with the specific professional courtesy of people accustomed to situations outside the normal range. She was given a real room, window, desk, bookshelf with books that had actually been read. She was told she had 48 hours before anything would be asked of her. She slept 14 hours the first night. The second day she spent alone at the desk, building what she privately called the map, the full architecture of the Cross family's financial structure as she understood it from 2 years inside Damien's life, annotated against what the documents revealed and what the gaps between them implied. Account structures, shell entities, the shell behind the shells, the pattern of an organization that had been growing laterally for years, adding complexity the way living things add it, not by design but by the accumulated decisions of people who needed to hide more than they'd hidden before. She was 3 hours into it when her laptop flagged an intrusion attempt. Sophisticated probe. The network security deflected it in 40 seconds. But before it closed, she caught the origin IP in the log and looked at it for a long moment and felt the temperature of the room change around her. She recognized the subnet. It belonged to a cybersecurity firm publicly contracted to the Cross family's corporate IT division. They were already looking for her. She printed the log and went downstairs and found Lucienne at the dining room table with 3 people she hadn't met, all of them looking at something on a tablet. She put the log on the table between them without announcing it. They found the network, she said. He looked at the log. His expression didn't shift, but something in the room did. A small, definite recalibration, the way temperature shifts before a storm you can't see yet. When? 20 minutes ago, 40 seconds before the system shut it down. A woman she didn't know yet, 30-ish, close-cropped hair, the economy of movement that comes from years of treating the body as a professional instrument, leaned over and looked at the log. Said something to Lucian in a language Celeste didn't catch. He replied briefly. "We'll move the network," he said. "This address is still secure. The probe didn't get through. They know I'm in the city. They knew that already. They know I'm not gone." She held his gaze. Which means the story they built, the woman who disappeared, discredited, finished, that story requires my absence to function, and I'm not absent. Something moved in his face, not surprise. Recalibration again, the same quality, like he was continuously updating an assessment that kept requiring revision. "This changes the timeline, Pisan," he said. "We were planning 3 weeks before any external moves." "How long now?" 10 days. "To do what?" "To give you enough operational context that you can function inside what we're building without getting yourself killed." He said it the way he said most things, evenly, without softening it, with the specific respect of someone who believes the person across from them can handle accurate information. "And I'm going to ask something of you that I wasn't going to ask for another 2 weeks." "Ask it." He looked at her steadily. "I need you to reach out to someone inside the Cross family. Someone who might be experiencing enough regret to provide information voluntarily." She knew immediately. She didn't want to say the name. "Damien," she said. "His access to the internal financials is unmatched. And based on what we've observed in the last 48 hours, he's been asking questions internally that his family finds inconvenient. He stood at an altar and accused me in front of 400 people. I know. He let them use him as the instrument. I know that too." Lucian's voice didn't soften, and it didn't harden either. It stayed level, which was somehow harder to push against than either alternative. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to consider whether his current position, which is deteriorating if my sources are accurate, makes him useful." She stood there in the stillness of the house with its careful professional quiet and thought about Damien's eyes in the anteroom. The splinter of doubt. The one moment before his mother spoke and he chose, or was not strong enough not to choose, compliance over truth. She thought about the woman she'd been 8 months ago, approving peonies, not mentioning wildflowers, deciding that accommodation was a reasonable price. She thought about the price. "Give me the contact protocol," she said, "and 48 hours to decide how to approach it." He nodded. She turned for the stairs and stopped. "The woman who looked at the log. Close-cropped hair." "Sarah." "She's the one who shut the probe down?" "She's the one who shut it down." "I want to talk to her, not just about whether the probe succeeded, about what they were specifically trying to access, what they were looking for." "I'll arrange it." She went back upstairs, sat at the desk, looked at the map on the screen, names and numbers and the lines between them, the language of a system she was teaching herself to read from the inside out. She opened her phone and called Gerald again. This time he picked up on the second ring. His voice had the caution of a man who had spent 2 days deciding how much he was willing to say. "Celeste?" "You knew," she said. Not a question. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds too long. "I need you to understand the position I was—" "Stop." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, which was worse than loud would have been. "Stop that sentence and tell me the truth. Did you know about the documents before the ceremony?" Another silence, different in quality from the first one. This was the silence of a man encountering a version of himself he'd been successfully avoiding until this moment. "I was told," Gerald said slowly, "that there were irregularities in your financial record that the Cross family had become aware of. Raymond told me this 2 weeks before the wedding. I assumed—" "You assumed." "I thought there was an explanation. I thought if I—" "You thought if you said nothing, the wedding would proceed, and the merger your firm has been positioning toward for 3 years would close, And whatever happened to me in the fallout was a problem you'd address later. She said it without heat. That was the thing about understanding something completely. It burned clean. Was I right? The silence this time was different from all the others. This was not calculation. This was the sound of a man looking at himself without the professional distance he usually maintained between himself and that particular view. Celeste. She ended the call. She sat with the phone face down on the desk. Her hands were flat on the surface. She breathed 4 counts in, 4 out. The same counting she'd done on the elevator floor in the dress. She looked at the map, the names, the lines, the patient architecture of people who had spent years building a structure on the assumption that the people around them were too compromised or too frightened to move against it. They were right about almost everyone. She opened her laptop and began composing the message to Damien through the secure channel Sarah had set up, a routing system that would reach his personal device without being traceable to her location. She chose her words the way she chose tools, for function rather than feeling. She told him only what he needed to know to respond. She had documentation, she knew who had built the case against her, and if he wanted the truth about what his family had actually done, he had 48 hours. She sent it before she could think about it twice. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of the room and thought about the card she'd picked up off the sidewalk 2 nights ago, and the name on it, and the specific strangeness of sitting here now, in this room, with the map on her screen and her father's silence in her phone, and her life reduced to a canvas bag and a decision she couldn't take back. The reply came at 2:17 in the morning. She wasn't asleep. She was at the desk with the lamp on low when the notification came through the routing channel. She read the message twice. I know what they did. I've been trying to reach you. Tell me where. She typed back. Not yet. First tell me what you know, specifically. The response came 4 minutes later, and it was longer than she expected, and it was worse. Raymond had your accounts profiled starting 18 months ago. The forensic accountant was on retainer. The documentation was built over 6 months. I didn't know until 3 days before the ceremony. By then they told me if I said anything, they'd use the secondary package. She stopped. Her hands went still over the keyboard. What secondary package? The pause that followed was long enough that she stood up and went to the window and looked at the dark street below and came back to the desk. When the reply came, it landed with the weight of something that had been held for a long time. There's a second set of documents. Not financial, personal. They told me it would destroy people close to you if it came out. I thought I could handle it after. I thought once we were married I could find a way to... She closed the laptop. 30 seconds in the dark. She counted them. Then she opened it again. Who are the people they're threatening? I can't tell you over this channel. Meet me, please. I know I don't have the right to ask you anything. But if you have what you say you have, we need to combine it before Raymond figures out I've been asking questions. He's been watching me since the ceremony. My own brother has been watching me. She read it twice. Then she went downstairs and found Lucien in the study with a book in his hands, which surprised her, though she couldn't have said why. He looked up when she came in without knocking, and she handed him the phone with the conversation open. He read it without expression. Set the phone on the desk between them. Secondary package, he said. I don't know what it is yet. He says personal, not financial. There are people in my life whose exposure would give the Cross family leverage over me even after everything collapsed. She looked at the phone. Priya. If they have something on Priya, anything that could be used to suggest she was complicit, helped me in some way. They could use it to discredit her as a witness and remove her as a resource. She paused. And my father. Lucian looked at her steadily. Gerald. Raymond knew about the documents 2 weeks before the ceremony, and Gerald knew Raymond knew. That means Raymond has documentation of Gerald's knowledge, which Gerald concealed. She said it without flinching because she had already done the flinching alone in the dark, and there was nothing left to spend on it. A covered-up obstruction is leverage that works in both directions. Against Gerald directly, and against me through Gerald. Would Raymond use it offensively or hold it as deterrent? Raymond uses everything offensively if he thinks the window is open. Vivian holds things in reserve. She prefers deterrence, cleaner, less exposure. She looked at the phone. But if Raymond thinks the situation is escalating beyond control, he doesn't wait for Vivian's preference. Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then, we meet him. I set the terms. Of course. And Sarah sweeps him before he comes within range of this building. Already assumed. He looked at her. Sleep for 3 hours. We'll arrange the meeting for morning. She did not sleep for 3 hours. She slept for 1 and lay awake for 2, which was not the same thing and felt nothing like it. And she lay in the dark of her room in the townhouse and looked at the ceiling and thought about the specific weight of a decision you cannot take back. Not the kind that happens to you, like a wedding that becomes a trial, but the kind you make yourself, with your eyes open, knowing exactly what it costs and choosing it anyway. The meeting was set for a parking structure in Midtown. Sarah's choice. Level 4, northeast stairwell, 11 a.m. 2 of Lucien's people in the structure before Damien arrived. Sarah with a signal scanner at the second level approach. Celeste with nothing she hadn't walked in with. Damien came alone. She could see that in the way he moved across the concrete toward her. Not the walk of a man with backup positioned, but the specific gait of someone who was frightened and had run out of ways to perform otherwise. He'd lost weight since the ceremony. 3 days invisible weight, which meant he hadn't been eating, which meant whatever was happening to him was happening in his body first, the way real things always do. He stopped 6 feet away. Celeste, don't. Her voice was flat as pavement. Tell me about the secondary package. He swallowed. His jaw worked. There's a man named Arthur Voss. He was your father's partner at the firm 12 years ago. He was removed. The official version was restructuring. The actual version was that he falsified client disclosures, and Gerald covered it up rather than reporting it because Voss had equity in 3 of Gerald's most profitable accounts. He stopped to breathe. Raymond found Voss 8 months ago. Voss gave them everything in exchange for whatever they paid him. They have a package that would expose Gerald for obstruction and Voss for the original fraud. Gerald could be disbarred, potentially prosecuted. The parking structure was cold. She could feel the concrete through her shoes and hear a car on the level below, and nothing else. They told me, Damien continued, that if I didn't go through with the public accusation, they'd release the Voss package to the AG's office and to the press simultaneously, and they'd arrange the timing to look like Gerald released the information about you to deflect from his own exposure. He stopped. His hand went to the back of his neck, the same gesture she'd seen from him 100 times, the tell he'd never learned to suppress. It would look like your father sacrificed you to save himself. She heard every word. She processed every word. She stood in the cold concrete air of the parking structure and felt the full architecture of it settle into place around her. Not a fraud, not a family protecting itself, but something constructed, layered, built to collapse in a specific direction that would bury everything and everyone it touched. You let them use you, she said, to protect my father, who knew about the forgery and said nothing. I know. You didn't tell me. They said if you knew, you'd go to the authorities immediately and the Voss package would be triggered within 24 hours as retaliation. So instead you destroyed me publicly in front of 400 people and then expected there to be an after. I thought the accusation would be investigated and disproven. There was no version of that where I survived intact. She took 1 step toward him, not aggressive, just closing the distance enough that he had to hold her gaze or visibly look away. You knew that? Or you didn't think hard enough to know it, and I genuinely cannot determine which is worse. He didn't defend himself. She gave him that. Where's the secondary package, she said. Raymond keeps the physical documentation in his personal office. But there's a third component. He looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. There's a person, a woman named Calloway. She built the original financial forgery. She manages the documentation for Raymond, and she has an independent copy of everything, miss, as insurance for herself in case Raymond ever decided she knew too much. Raymond doesn't know she has it. No, she built herself a failsafe. Marcus told me 3 days ago when he realized what Raymond was actually planning to do with all of it. Which is what? Damien's face went through something she didn't immediately have a name for. Then she did. It was fear. Not the surface kind. Not the fear of consequence, but structural fear. The kind that comes when you've just understood the actual dimensions of the thing you've been standing inside. The merger, he said. Raymond has been structuring it as a vehicle for moving capital out of accounts connected to. I don't know the full picture. Marcus only got fragments, but the money moving through this merger doesn't belong to the Cross family. It belongs to people Raymond has been working with for a very long time, people who are not interested in complications. She heard it, and the parking structure went quiet around her in the way that spaces go quiet when the thing you've just heard is larger than the room you're standing in. He's laundering for an outside organization, she said, and everything they did to you, the forgery, the Voss package, all of it, it's not just about controlling me or eliminating a variable. It's about making sure the merger closes cleanly. His voice had dropped. No fiancé with access to the financial structure. No one asking questions from inside. No complications. She stood very still and let that move through her like cold water finding every level. They had not destroyed her to protect a family secret. They had destroyed her to protect a criminal infrastructure she had been standing directly adjacent to for 2 years without knowing it existed. She turned and found Sarah 3 feet behind her, which she had expected. What she had not expected was the look on Sarah's face, controlled and professional, and underneath that, the taut, specific tension of someone whose tactical picture has just changed significantly. "We need to move," Sarah said. Quiet, factual. "I know. There's a vehicle signature that's been circling this structure for 11 minutes. It doesn't match someone looking for parking." Damien went pale. "They followed me." "You were swept before you arrived," Sarah said without inflection. "You're clean." "Which means they anticipated this meeting through another channel." She looked at Celeste. 4 minutes before I start making decisions, you'll want to be present for." Celeste looked at Damien. "Can you reach Marcus without going through Raymond?" "Yes." "Tell him we need everything he has, every fragment, and tell him that if he has any instinct for self-preservation remaining, he shares it before Raymond realizes he shared anything with you." She held his eyes. "Go out the south stairwell. Don't go home. Don't go to the office. Find somewhere they don't have on any list and stay there until I contact you." "Celeste, go." He went. They were back at the townhouse in 22 minutes. Sarah took the stairs fast. Lucien was already standing in the main room with Ren and Dasha, both looking at a laptop on the table. Celeste told him everything. The Voss package, Callaway, the merger as a laundering vehicle, the outside organization. She told it in sequence, no editorializing, and watched the room process it the way a room processes information that changes the size of the problem. "Callaway," Lucien said when she finished. He said the name the way you say the name of something that has history attached to it. "You know her," Celeste said. "She was employed by an associate of mine 4 years ago. She was removed when it was discovered she'd been selling information to a secondary client." He paused. The secondary client was Raymond Cross. The room went quiet. "She's been his asset for 4 years, Celeste said, which means the forgery against me wasn't built over 6 months. The relationship that made it possible was built over 4 years." She watched his face. "And the failsafe she built for herself, the independent copy. She learned that from working inside your organization. She knows enough about how I operate," he said, "that if Raymond is using her to manage all of this, he has structural insight into how I work." She looked at the laptop on the table, at the network log from 2 days ago, at the vehicle that had been circling the parking structure. "He's not just watching us," she said. "He has a window into your operations, through Callaway. We've been building a case against him while he's been watching us build it." Lucien said nothing. He didn't need to. She sat down because her legs had made the decision before she did. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at the map she'd been building for 3 days. The architecture, the connection lines, the names, all of it assembled under observation. All of it potentially visible to a man who had spent 7 years building something that he had every reason to protect, at whatever cost the protection required. "Callaway," she said again. "Where is she?" "I don't know currently." "Then she's the first problem." She looked up. "Because she has the secondary package, which is the only leverage Raymond has left against anyone connected to me. And if we're going to move before he closes the merger..." Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number, not routed through the secure channel. She looked at Sarah, who nodded once. She picked up. "Ms. Ashford." A woman's voice. controlled, precise. The specific timbre of someone making a call they have rehearsed but cannot quite feel comfortable with. My name is Calloway. I think we need to speak before Raymond Cross makes a decision tonight that neither of us can walk back from. The room around her went absolutely still. I'm listening, Celeste said. I built the documentation that destroyed your wedding. The voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. I'm not calling to apologize. I'm calling because Raymond received a communication 2 hours ago from the organization behind the merger, and whatever they told him, he made 3 phone calls immediately after that his brother doesn't know about. A pause, long enough to be deliberate. One of those calls was to a man who handles a specific category of problem for people in Raymond's position, the category that doesn't generate paperwork. Celeste's breath went shallow. He's sending someone, she said. Not for you. Another pause. For Damien. Tonight. Because Damien has been asking questions that Raymond can no longer afford to answer, and because a dead witness is a closed variable, and because if Damien is gone, there's no one left inside the Cross family who can corroborate anything you have. The voice steadied to something that sounded like the last solid thing in an unstable structure. I have everything, Ms. Ashford, every document, every communication, every thread of what they did to you and why. I've held it as insurance for 4 years. But if Raymond eliminates Damien tonight and then turns his attention to me, and he will, because I am now the last person who knows the full picture, my insurance becomes worthless. What do you want? The same thing you want. For this to end in a way where I'm still alive at the end of it. A beat. I'll give you everything I have. Tonight. But you need to get to Damien Cross before Raymond's man does. And you need to do it in the next 2. She didn't wait for Lucian to tell her to move. She was already on her feet, already looking at Sarah. Where's Damien? Right now. Do we have eyes on him? Sarah was at the laptop before the sentence finished. Last contact 40 minutes ago, moving south on foot from the parking structure. He doesn't have a safe location. Celeste grabbed her jacket off the chair back. His entire life is inside the Cross infrastructure. Every address they know, every contact they've mapped. She was already running the list in her head. The people Damien had mentioned in 2 years of dinners and weekends, and the specific intimacy of a relationship that had felt real even when it was being used as scaffolding for something else. His assistant, Jolene, she lives in Carroll Gardens. He mentioned her apartment once, crashed there during a board dispute 2 years ago. Raymond wouldn't have it on any list because she's staff. She's nobody to them. Sarah was already running the name. Jolene Marsh, 41 Sullivan Street, Unit 3. Lucien was pulling on his coat. No discussion, no committee. She had noticed this about him in the past 72 hours. In a crisis, he compressed rather than expanded, shed everything unnecessary with the efficiency of someone who had learned that deliberation and decision were not the same thing. Ren and Dasha take the secondary approach, he said. Sarah, root us and monitor. Calloway stays on the line. Celeste was already in the hall. The car moved through the city with a speed that was faster than traffic and slower than attention. Bell, the driver, a man of approximately 9 words, who navigated with the specific competence of someone who understood that arrival was the entire job, and everything else was secondary. Celeste sat in the back with her phone and Lucian beside her, and the city outside the windows doing what it always did, which was continue without any awareness of or interest in what was happening inside any particular car moving through it. She called the unknown number. Calloway picked up on the first ring. I'm moving toward him now, Celeste said. How long do I have? Raymond's call was at 9:47. His man is local, midtown to Carroll Gardens at this hour. A pause with calculation in it. 40 minutes from when Raymond made the call. You have maybe 20 from now. Where are you? Somewhere Raymond hasn't found yet. I want to keep it that way until I know Cross is secured and until I know what the after looks like. After you give us everything. After you guarantee me something. Celeste looked out at the East River as they crossed the bridge. Black water, bridge lights, the geometry of the city from above suggesting order that didn't exist at street level. I can't guarantee your legal exposure, she said. You built a forgery that destroyed my life. That's a fact and evidence regardless of what you provide. I know what I did. Then you know what I can and can't promise. A silence. Then, I want to give testimony. Formal, protected, to federal prosecutors. I want cooperation considered before charges are filed, not after. That's a federal determination, not mine. You'll have enough, once I give you what I have, to make a compelling argument to whoever makes that determination. The professional layer in the voice dropped just enough to show what was underneath, which was a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had made a decision about it that she couldn't take back. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for the consideration that people who cooperate fully are supposed to receive. I'll argue for it, Celeste said. That's what I can give you. A pause. That'll do, Calloway said, and started talking. She talked for 6 minutes, the exact time it took to cross into Brooklyn and navigate toward Carroll Gardens. And in those 6 minutes, she gave Celeste the architecture of 4 years of Raymond Cross's operation in a compression so dense that Celeste stopped thinking about the car and the clock and started thinking about scope. The outside organization Raymond had been laundering for wasn't a domestic operation. It was a network with active presence in 4 countries, regulatory penetration in 2 of them, a U.S.-side investment portfolio embedded inside legitimate financial structures deeply enough that a surface audit would find nothing. The merger wasn't a vehicle. It was a keystone. The merger closing would activate a restructuring sequence that moved capital across 6 entities over 90 days and made it, at the end of that sequence, effectively untraceable. Raymond Cross had been building this for 7 years. Vivian had known for 5. Damien had become a liability the moment he'd started asking questions, because Damien had legitimate signatory authority over 2 of the entities in the restructuring sequence. A signatory who was asking questions was a signatory who might refuse to sign. And a signatory who refused to sign was a problem that had exactly one clean solution at this stage of the timeline. He was never safe after the ceremony, Celeste said. It came out quieter than she'd intended. No, Calloway said. He was a tool that had become a liability. That's all they ever saw. Fell pulled to the curb on Sullivan Street. Celeste was out before the car stopped fully, moving toward the building entrance with Lucian 1 step behind, the November air hitting her face and her mind running in 2 tracks simultaneously. Calloway still in one ear, the intercom panel 4 steps up. She found the unit and pressed the buzzer. Nothing. She pressed it again. A crackle. Then a woman's voice, thick with sleep and a confusion that was quickly becoming something else. Who is... My name is Celeste Ashford. I need to speak with Damien Cross. Right now, please. A silence long enough that she felt Lucian shift his weight beside her. Then the door buzzed open. Jolene Marsh was a woman who had been woken from dead sleep and had the practical intelligence not to waste time on it. She stood in her apartment doorway in a robe with her arms crossed and looked at Celeste with the expression of someone who had followed the news closely enough to recognize a face and was making a rapid series of decisions about what that recognition meant. He's here, she said. Back room. Showed up an hour ago and wouldn't tell me what was happening. I need him moving in the next 2 minutes. Jolene looked at Lucian, then back at Celeste. She made her decision the way practical people do. Fast, without theater. She stepped back and let them through. Damien was on the pull-out couch with his jacket still on and his elbows on his knees, and the look of a man who had sat down meaning to think, and had instead gone somewhere internal and hollow. He looked up when she came through the door. She didn't give him the time. Get up, right now. There's someone coming to this address and you cannot be here when they arrive. He stood. The muscle memory of responding to urgency was apparently still intact even when everything else had been stripped away. What? Raymond made a call after you left the parking structure. A specific kind of call. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She watched it land, watched his face move through disbelief and then through something worse. The particular stillness of a body understanding something before the mind is ready to admit it. He wouldn't, Damien said. Quiet, not quite certain. He did. She held his eyes, and she didn't soften it because softening it was a luxury neither of them had right now. He wouldn't what? He wouldn't forge evidence to destroy his future sister-in-law? He wouldn't build a criminal enterprise and use his nephew's wedding as structural cover? Tell me the line, Damien. Tell me the specific line you believe he wouldn't cross. His mouth opened, closed. There is no line, she said. That's what I've been learning all week. There's only what's useful and what isn't. Right now you are not useful to him. Get your coat. They were back on the street in 80 seconds. Jolene handed Damien his coat without being asked, which Celeste noted and filed away as a quality worth remembering. Wren was already at the corner in a second vehicle she hadn't heard arrive. They were 4 blocks from Sullivan Street when a dark SUV turned onto it behind them, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a vehicle that already knew where it was going. Celeste saw it in the side mirror, said nothing. Fell's eyes went to the rear view, held for 2 seconds, and then he made a left that was not on any route back to the townhouse. They know we were there, Lucian said. Already gone, Sarah said through the car audio, monitoring remotely. They have the building entrance on footage if they're pulling it in real time. They know Damien left with someone. They don't have the vehicle. Yet, Fell said, his 9th word since she'd met him. Route us to the secondary location, Lucienne said. She didn't ask where. She was learning the difference between questions that changed what you did right now and questions that could wait, and this one could wait. She looked at Damien in the seat beside her. His hands were on his thighs. They were not quite steady. Marcus, she said, you said he had fragments. Did he give them to you? Damien reached into his jacket and produced a folded envelope. Before the parking structure. He was scared. He gave me what he had and told me he was going to his wife's family in Connecticut. She took it. 7 pages inside. Printouts, some partial, some photographed from physical documents. She went through them in the moving car with the overhead light off, reading by the city light coming through the window, and on the 7th page she found a name she hadn't seen before. Harlan Voss. Not Arthur. Harlan. A son. She looked up. Calloway. Still on the line. She'd gone quiet during the movement, but the ambient sound of wherever she was, controlled space, indoor air, was still there. Who is Harlan Voss? Celeste said. A pause, the kind that had weight in it. Arthur Voss's son, Calloway said. He's been working inside the Cross Financial Division for 3 years. Raymond recruited him specifically. He managed the technical construction of the forgery against you. He used his knowledge of his father's relationship with Gerald to make the account structures convincing. She stopped. He's also the one who has been feeding Raymond information about Lucien Draven's organization. He was placed there 8 months before your wedding. The car went very quiet. Celeste turned and looked at Lucy Nam Yen. He was already looking at her. His jaw was set and his eyes had gone to something purely operational, but underneath the operational layer was something she hadn't seen on his face before. The specific quality of a man who has just discovered that the floor he's been standing on was built by someone else. Harlan Voss, he said. He came to us through a referral from a financial contact in Amsterdam, 8 months ago. His voice was controlled, but something had shifted beneath it. Not anger. Worse than anger. The cold, precise thing that comes after anger has burned through and left only clarity. He's in the accounting division. He's Raymond's window into your operations, Celeste said. He has access to transaction records, communication logs, financial movement patterns. Lucienne's voice stayed level. Not operational. The operational side is firewalled, but enough to understand our exposure profile, enough to anticipate our moves. She thought about the network probe 2 nights ago, the vehicle circling the parking structure. The speed with which Raymond had anticipated a meeting arranged through an encrypted channel less than 10 hours before it happened. It wasn't Calloway giving Raymond insight, she said. It was Harlan. Calloway didn't know about him. No, Calloway said from the phone. I didn't. Raymond compartmentalized. I thought the intelligence on your movements was coming from standard surveillance. I had no idea there was an asset inside Draven's organization. She looked at the page with Harlan's name on it. The personnel record. 3 years of employment. Amsterdam referral. She thought about the accounting division and what access to financial movement patterns actually meant in practical terms. Not the big decisions, but the texture of how an organization moved money, which was ultimately the texture of how it thought and what it valued and where its edges were. "Where is he right now?" she said. "Tonight. Does he have access to your systems tonight?" Lucien already had his phone out. He typed something, looked up and said something to Fell in a low voice, and Fell made 2 quick turns that changed their direction completely. "He's at the office," Sarah said through the audio. Her voice had tightened. "Access badge last scanned at the secondary financial server room at 9:15 p.m. He's been in there for over 2 hours." "Doing what?" Celeste said. "The server room." Sarah's voice was flat now in the way that voices go flat when the implications of a thing arrive faster than the words to describe them. "He's been in the server room for 2 hours. The silence in the car had a specific weight. "He's not feeding Raymond information," Lucien said, each word deliberate. "He's extracting it. Tonight." Celeste's mind ran the sequence without being asked to. The merger timeline. If the outside organization found out we were building a case, if Raymond told them, they moved the closing date up, which means they need everything your operation has on the cross-financial structure before we can use it, Lucien said. He was already on a second call, speaking fast and low. He ended it in 30 seconds. Looked at her. "I have 2 people at that building. They can secure the server room and remove him in under 10 minutes. If you do that, Raymond knows tonight that his window is closed. He accelerates everything. If I don't, by morning he has 3 years of what I've built against his operation, and we have nothing." She held his gaze. The car was moving. Outside, the city was enormous and indifferent and completely uninterested in what was happening in this vehicle. Her mind was running the structure, looking for the load-bearing element, the one thing you remove to bring the rest down in the right direction. "Don't pull him," she said. "Not yet. Give me 45 minutes. Celeste, 45 minutes. Let him work. Let him believe he's succeeding." She looked at the pages in her hands, at Harlan's name, at the personnel record with its Amsterdam referral and its 3 years of careful placement. "If we pull him now, Raymond accelerates, and we lose the initiative. But if we spend the next 45 minutes getting what Calloway has into the hands of someone with federal authority, someone who can act on it tonight, then when we pull Harlan, it's already too late for Raymond to accelerate anything. The accounts are frozen before he can move them. The merger documents are already in federal hands before he can file them." Lucien looked at her for a long moment. "Who do you know with federal authority who answers their phone at midnight?" She had been thinking about this since the parking structure, since the shape of what needed to happen had started resolving out of the noise. "There's an assistant U.S. attorney named Brennan," she said. "He spent 3 years investigating the merger's predecessor deal before it was killed politically. He didn't kill it. It was killed for him, and he's been waiting for something to reopen it ever since. I know this because he came to a function Gerald hosted 18 months ago, and he spent 45 minutes at the bar talking to me about financial regulatory structures because I was the only person in the room who understood what he was saying." She paused. "He gave me his personal cell. I still have it." Lucien studied her face for a moment. Then, "Make the call." Brennan picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice had the alertness of someone whose relationship with sleep had long been subordinated to their relationship with unfinished work. "This is Celeste Ashford," she said. "You gave me your number 18 months ago at a function. You said if I ever had anything on the cross-merger structure to call you." A beat. "Ms. Ashford." His voice went careful in the way of someone who understood immediately that this call was what he'd thought it might be and was adjusting accordingly. "I'm aware of what happened this week." "Then you're aware of what they used me for." "I have documentation. I have a witness inside the family who will testify. I have a source who built the financial forgery and will provide full cooperation. I also have evidence of an active data extraction happening right now at an organization that has been building a case against the Cross operation. An extraction that, if it succeeds, will move the documentation outside our reach before morning." She kept her voice even. "I need 2 things: federal authority to protect the data being extracted, and a formal channel open tonight for the documentation I'm sending you in the next 30 minutes. A silence. She heard him moving. A door. The sound of a man finding a room in a house that wasn't expecting this conversation. "Send me what you have," Brennan said. "Now, before anything else. I need to see it." "Opening the channel now," Sarah said through the car audio. already ahead of the instruction. "You'll have it in 4 minutes," Celeste said. The secondary location was a commercial floor in a neighborhood she was orienting herself to as they arrived. Less residential than the townhouse, more functional, with the atmosphere of a space designed for compressed timelines and people who couldn't afford to be somewhere that looked like what they were doing. Lucien Cha got out first. She followed. Damien followed her, and Calloway was already there. Smaller than the voice had suggested. Mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back without ceremony, wearing clothes that said she'd been somewhere prepared to leave at short notice. She was sitting at a table with a hard drive in front of her, and she looked up when Celeste came through the door, and they looked at each other across the room for a moment that had a significant amount of weight in it for two people who had never been in the same space before. "Everything's on the drive," Calloway said. 4 years. Celeste nodded. She sat down across from her, and Lucien put people at the doors, and Sarah connected the drive to the secure transmission system, and the files began to move, while Brennan's line stayed open in Celeste's ear. At 1:14 a.m., Brennan said, "I have it." At 1:17, "Stay where you are. Don't let anyone leave. I'm making 2 calls." At 1:31, Lucien's phone rang. He answered, listened for 40 seconds, said 2 words, and ended the call. Looked at Celeste. "Harlan Voss just left the building," he said, "on foot, moving fast. Which means he finished the extraction, and he's carrying it out physically rather than transmitting it." "Where?" "Moving toward the waterfront. Ren and Dasha are on him." She was already standing. "Raymond." "At a location on the Hudson his family owns. An event property. Closed tonight." A pause that had something in it she hadn't heard from him before. A tightening. The controlled specific tension of a man who has just seen the board rearrange into a configuration he didn't anticipate. "The outside organization has people there. They moved the closing meeting up. They're signing the merger documents tonight." She felt the entire structure collapse into a single point. Not next week, not in the morning, tonight. While she'd been building a case and making calls and moving pieces across the board, Raymond had seen the walls closing and had done what people with resources do when they've run out of patience. He'd stopped waiting and started ending it. "If the merger closes tonight," she began, "the capital moves within the restructuring sequence, and by the time federal jurisdiction catches up to it, there's nothing left to seize." Lucien's voice was flat. "The documentation convicts Raymond in a courtroom eventually. The people behind the merger walk with everything." She looked at him. "Where on the Hudson?" "Celeste." "Where?" He held her gaze for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds she understood that what he was deciding had nothing to do with logistics. "A property called Aldrich Point Estate. North End, private dock, event facilities. Enough security to look like a legitimate gathering." A pause. "It's not a conversation we interrupt with 2 people. How many can you move in 20 minutes? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her the way he had in the diner on West 44th, the first morning. The recalibration. The expression of a man continuously revising an assessment that kept demanding revision. Then he made a decision she could see him making, not in his face, but in the set of his shoulders. "All of them," he said. She was moving toward the door when her phone rang. Unknown number, different from Calloway's line. She stopped and answered it. "Ms. Ashford." A man's voice, smooth, deliberate, unhurried in the specific way of someone who has never once operated from a position of weakness and considers it a permanent condition. "My name isn't important. What's important is that we're aware of your location, we're aware of what you've transmitted to the federal attorney's office, and we'd like you to understand something before you make further decisions tonight." A pause, timed perfectly. The pause of someone who rehearses silences. "We have Damien Cross." She turned. The chair where Damien had been sitting was empty. She didn't remember him leaving the room. She hadn't seen him go. She'd been focused on Lucien, on Brennan's line, on the logistics of 20 minutes in a Hudson estate, and Damien Cross had walked out of the room, and she hadn't noticed because she'd stopped treating him as a variable that required monitoring. "We have him at the Aldrich Point property," the voice continued. "His continued good health is contingent on something very simple. You will contact Brennan's office and inform him that the documentation you provided was fabricated. You will provide a written statement retracting everything. You will do this within 30 minutes, and in exchange, Mr. Cross will be released and you will be permitted to... She ended the call. Lucian was already looking at the empty chair. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone to something purely operational, the face of a man who has stopped calculating and started moving. They have him, she said. I heard. They want a retraction, 30 minutes, which they won't honor regardless. He said it without inflection, not comfort, just accuracy. I know. She looked at him. Aldrich Point. He nodded once. She looked around the room, at Sarah at the screen, at Calloway sitting with her hands flat on the table and the expression of a woman who had just heard the full weight of what she'd spent 4 years enabling, at the hard drive, at the transmission log showing what had already gone to Brennan's office. She thought about what she'd said to Damien in the parking structure. There is no line. There's only what's useful and what isn't. She had been describing Raymond. Now she was going to have to decide what was true about herself, whether the woman who had walked out of the Grand Meridian with nothing and rebuilt herself into something that could sit across from Lucian Draven and command a room at 2 a.m. was capable of what the next hour actually required. Brennan, she said into the phone, are you still there? I'm here. The people behind the merger have taken a witness. They're at the Aldrich Point property on the Hudson. I need you to understand that whatever happens at that location in the next hour is going to happen before your jurisdiction can reach it. I need you to be ready to move the moment it resolves. She paused. Everything on that drive is real. My retraction would not be. A silence. Ms. Ashford, Brennan said carefully, I cannot authorize. I know what you can't authorize. She looked at Lucian. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm telling you to be ready. She put the phone in her pocket. The convoy left the secondary location 11 minutes later. 4 vehicles, 14 people. A transmission link to Sarah, who was staying back with Calloway, and the drive and Brennan's open line. Celeste sat in the lead car beside Lucian, her hands in her lap, her mind running every variable she could quantify and filing the ones she couldn't into the category of things she would handle when she met them. And then, in the car, moving through the city toward the Hudson, her phone buzzed again. Not Brennan. Not an unknown number. The routing channel. The secure system Sarah had built. A message coming through on the same channel she'd used to reach Damien. She opened it. It was not from Damien. The sender ID was one she didn't recognize, a string of numbers rather than a name, the kind of address that existed specifically to be untraceable. She stared at the message for a moment and felt the temperature of her blood drop by several degrees. The message read, Before you reach Aldrich Point, you should know that Lucian Draven has been aware of the Harlan Voss placement for 6 weeks. He allowed it to continue. Ask him why. She read it twice. 3 times. She looked at Lucien in the seat beside her. He was looking at his phone, at something on the screen, and something in his posture, the particular quality of a man who does not realize he is being observed, told her that whatever he was reading, it was not unrelated to what she had just received. She had no way of knowing yet whether the message was true. She had no way of knowing whether it was Raymond's last move, a wedge driven into the one alliance she had left, or whether it was something else entirely, something with more weight and more history than a desperate man throwing stones at the last window he hadn't broken. What she knew was this. She was 40 minutes from a property on the Hudson where a man who had been used and discarded was being held by people who didn't generate paperwork. She was sitting beside a man who might have known for 6 weeks that his organization had been compromised and had said nothing. She had 14 people in 4 vehicles and a federal attorney on an open line, and everything she had built in the past 10 days balanced on the next hour like a structure built on ground that might not be solid. She put the phone face down on her knee. She looked at the road ahead. She breathed in, 4 counts. She breathed out, 4 counts. And she said nothing, because there were questions you asked when the answer would change what you did right now, and there were questions you held until the moment was right. Until the smoke cleared and the room was quiet, and the people who needed to answer for things were in a position where they could no longer choose not to. This question could not wait much longer, but it could wait 20 more minutes. The Hudson came into view ahead, dark and wide and utterly indifferent, and somewhere along its northern edge the lights of the Aldrich Point estate were burning against the November dark. And inside those lights, Raymond Cross was signing documents and believing, with the specific confidence of a man who had spent 7 years building something he'd decided was permanent, that he had already won. He was about to find out what permanent actually. The message was still face down on her knee when the first gate came into view. 20 minutes. She'd given herself 20 minutes to hold the question, and the 20 minutes were gone, and the gate was 30 yards ahead, and Lucien was beside her in the dark of the car, and she had not said a word to him since reading what had come through the routing channel. She turned the phone over. Read it one more time. Ask him why. She looked at Lucien. The Harlan Voss placement, she said. How long have you known about it? The car kept moving. Fell didn't slow. The gate was 20 yards now, the security lights washing yellow across the gravel drive, and in the 2 seconds between her question and Lucien's response, she heard the specific quality of a silence that was not the silence of a man who didn't understand the question. 6 weeks, he said. The number landed exactly the way she'd known it would land, and she sat with it for 1 second, 2, 3. Her hands flat on her thighs, her jaw set, her mind running the implications with the cold mechanical efficiency that came when emotion had nowhere left to go, and the only option remaining was function. You let him stay, she said. Yes. You let him keep feeding Raymond information about your operation while I was inside it, while I was building the map, while I was making calls and identifying sources and putting together everything we needed to move against the Cross family. Her voice was quiet, not shaking, just quiet in the way that things go quiet when there's nothing left to perform. You used my work as bait. I used his access to control what Raymond believed he knew. Lucien's voice was even, not defensive, not apologetic. If I'd pulled Harlan 6 weeks ago, Raymond would have gone dark. He would have moved the merger timeline up immediately, and we'd have had nothing. By leaving Harlan in place and managing what he could see, you decided what I was allowed to know, she said. You made that decision without telling me, while I was sitting in your townhouse believing I was a partner in this. Fell brought the car to a stop. The gate was directly ahead. Lucien's people in the trailing vehicles held position. Lucien turned and looked at her directly. You're right, he said. That's accurate. And if we get through the next hour, and you want to have the full conversation about it, I'll have it with you, every piece of it. He held her eyes. But Damien Cross is on that property right now, and the merger documents are being signed, and I need to know if you're in or out. She looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the gate. In, she said. We finish this conversation after. Agreed. She was already opening the car door. The gate came down fast. Lucien's people had the approach timed, and the security on the other side were doing exactly what he'd told her they would do, which was react a half-second too late, reaching for radios rather than weapons because they had not fully believed the threat until the 4 vehicles were already through and the gravel was already scattering under the tires. She was out of the car before it stopped. Moving low across the drive toward the main building side entrance, Lucien 3 feet to her left. The estate grounds lit in patches that created as much shadow as illumination. Cold air in her lungs. Her heart moving fast, not racing, just fast. The specific elevated rhythm of a body that understands something serious is happening and is allocating resources accordingly. The side entrance was unlocked. She stopped. Touched Lucien's arm. He stopped. She looked at the unlocked latch, the dark interior, the door that should have had a guard on the other side of it, and did not. They knew we were coming, she said. Very quiet. Lucien looked at the door. His jaw tightened. Harlan. Harlan Voss, with his physical extraction and his 12 minutes head start. Ren and Dasha had been on him, but Harlan had been Raymond's man for 3 years and had known this night might come and had presumably planned for it. 1 call before Ren got close. 1 text. Enough to tell Raymond that the convoy was coming and that the controlled ending he'd planned for tonight had just become something else. She went through the door anyway. The interior was a series of large connected rooms reconfigured for the event. Folding walls pulled back, the space opened into something that could pass, to anyone reviewing footage, as a routine business gathering. Long table, documents, water glasses. The infrastructure of a signing ceremony assembled with enough care to communicate that the people involved had thought about how this would look afterward. Nobody in the room. She looked at the table, looked at the merger documents, signature pages tabbed in blue, pages lined up with the precision of people who understood that paperwork was the architecture of power. She looked at the signature lines and saw 4 names already signed in ink. Raymond. 2 she didn't recognize. Vivian Cross. All 3 signed. Dated tonight, an hour ago. They already closed it, she said. Lucienne picked up the top page, read it. The signing is complete. Capital movement triggers on the documents being filed. Filing goes through a registered agent, tomorrow morning, if the registered agent receives them. We take the documents. He set the page down. It stops tonight's timeline. It doesn't stop Raymond from signing replacements. It buys Brennan 12 hours to get injunctive relief that freezes the underlying accounts. She met his eyes. One problem at a time. From the east wing came a sound, controlled, compressed, the specific sound of a physical confrontation conducted by people who knew how to end things quickly. Then Wren's voice through the communications channel, clipped and factual. East wing clear, 2 down, no sign of Cross. She looked at the room. The empty chairs, the water glasses with condensation still beating on them. 20 minutes ago, maybe less, there had been people sitting at this table finishing what they'd come here to finish. She looked at the condensation. She looked at the door to the south. The boat, she said, and ran. 60 yards of lawn sloping toward the water, the estate's exterior lights throwing shadows that moved with her, the November air sharp enough to make her eyes water, and her lungs work harder. She heard Lucienne behind her. She didn't slow. The dock light was on ahead, a yellow pool on weathered planks, and the boat at the end of it was still running at idle, that low vibration she felt in her sternum before she heard it. Still tied, still running. 3 people on the dock, Raymond Cross at the near end with his hands in his coat pockets, the posture of a man who has decided, somewhere in the past hour, that composed is the only mode he has remaining, and he is going to inhabit it fully until he cannot. Beside him, a man she didn't know, large, still, with the specific physical quality of someone employed for problems that required presence rather than conversation. And at the far end of the dock, near the boat's stern with his hands behind him, Damien, standing, conscious, a cut along his jaw that had bled and dried and would scar if he let it. Jacket gone. Standing in his shirt in the November cold with the careful stillness of a man who has been told exactly what the parameters of his survival are. She stopped at the edge of the dock. Raymond looked at her without surprise. "You made good time," he said. "Step away from him." "I don't think that's the dynamic here." He glanced past her at Lucienne, who had come up 2 steps behind. "Mr. Draven, I've been anticipating this conversation for some time." "The documents are gone," Lucian said. "Your merger doesn't file tomorrow." Something moved across Raymond's face. Not panic. He was too disciplined for panic. Recalculation. The rapid internal adjustment of a man rerunning numbers. Documents can be replaced. The accounts they're designed to move through will be frozen by 6 a.m. You have a federal attorney in possession of 4 years of documentation who is currently making calls that will make your morning extremely unproductive. Federal processes move slowly. Not when the attorney has been waiting 3 years for the case to reopen. Celeste stepped onto the dock. 1 step. Enough to establish that she was not watching from the edge. "It's over, Raymond. The question is whether you understand that now or whether you wait until you're in a room with federal prosecutors to decide what cooperation looks like." She heard from the access road behind the estate the sound of vehicles that were not Lucienne's. The sound of official vehicles. She had learned in the past week to distinguish the specific acoustics of federal approach from private convoy. Different weight, different cadence. Raymond heard it too. He looked at the road. He looked at the boat. He looked at the large man beside him, and something passed between them that she couldn't fully read, but that changed the large man's posture in a way she didn't like. A slight forward shift, a reorientation of attention that moved from Raymond to her and then to Lucienne and back again. She looked at the large man's hands. She looked at the angle of his weight. She had exactly enough time to register what was happening before it happened. He moved toward Lucien, not her. She'd anticipated that from how he'd been watching, Lucien was the tactical priority, the one whose people were positioned across the drive. And Lucien was already moving when she saw it, stepping not backward but sideways, drawing the angle away from the dock's edge. And the two people from Lucien's convoy, who had been at the periphery of her vision since the dock came into sight, responded with a precision that was conclusive within 4 seconds. The large man went down onto the dock planks with a sound that was solid and definitive, and he did not get up. Raymond had not moved. His hands were still in his coat pockets. He looked at the man on the planks for a long moment, and then he looked at Celeste, and she watched something go out of his face. Not composure, because composure is a performance, but the actual structure beneath the performance, and she watched the structure fail. "The people you work for," she said. Her breath was coming harder than she wanted it to. She didn't let it show in her voice. "The organization behind the merger. They're going to know by morning that the deal collapsed. They're going to know it collapsed because of your exposure." She held his eyes. "What do you think their response to that is going to be? Not to us. To you." Raymond said nothing. "You built your insurance on leverage, on having something held over everyone in your reach. But the documents are gone, and the accounts are freezing, and Callaway has given full cooperation, and the people you've been protecting have no more use for you tonight than you had for Damien." She took one more step down the dock toward him. The wood was wet under her shoes. The water was black on both sides and moving with a slow, cold current that didn't care about any of them. "The only play you have left is Brennan's office, before they come through that gate, because the window where cooperation means something real closes the moment they get to you, and they're coming right now." As if to confirm it, headlights on the access road, federal vehicles coming through the gate. Not fast, measured, the pace of authority that doesn't need to rush because it has already arrived. Raymond looked at the road. He looked at the boat. He looked at Celeste with an expression she would carry for a long time. Not hatred, not defeat, but the specific exhausted recognition of a man who has played every card in a hand he spent 7 years building and has just understood with complete clarity the final count. He took his hands out of his coat pockets. He turned to face the access road. But Celeste had stopped watching Raymond. She was watching Damien because something had changed at the far end of the dock. A movement, small, the large man on the planks not as finished as he'd appeared. And the realization hit her at the same moment she heard Damien's intake of breath and saw him take a step back toward the water's edge. And she was moving before the thought completed itself. She covered the dock in 6 steps, her shoes hitting the wet planks hard enough to feel through her ankles, and she grabbed Damien's arm 2 feet from the edge as the large man on the planks reached for something at his ankle with the specific economy of a man who had been playing injured and had been waiting for the moment when no one was looking at him. Lucien was faster. She didn't see what Lucien did. She heard it. One sharp sound, not a shot, something more controlled than that. And the large man on the planks was definitively finished, and she had Damien's arm in both hands, and they were 3 feet from the edge of the dock, and the black water was moving below them with its cold, patient indifference. Damien was breathing in gasps. The cut on his jaw had opened again, blood on the collar of his shirt, dark in the dock light. "I've got you," she said. It came out rougher than she intended. "I've got you. Stop moving." He stopped moving. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has just understood, at the biological level, how close a thing was. "They told me," he started. "I know." She didn't let go of his arm. "I know what they told you. It doesn't matter right now." "Celeste, it doesn't matter right now." She held his eyes until she was certain he was with her, fully, not somewhere inside the thing that had almost happened. "Can you walk?" "Yes?" "Then walk." Brennan was in the second federal vehicle, which surprised her, and he moved across the gravel with 2 agents and the expression of a man who had been waiting 3 years for a specific night and had decided he was going to be physically present when it arrived. Raymond Cross was taken into custody at the dock without resistance. She watched it happen with the particular detachment of someone who has been running on adrenaline for so long that significant events register as data rather than feeling. The man on the planks, was taken from the planks. The estate was secured. The merger documents were collected from the main room and transferred to Brennan's team with a chain of custody log Sarah had been generating remotely since the first page was photographed. She stood at the edge of the dock while all of it happened around her and she breathed. In, 4 counts. Out, 4 counts. Lucian came and stood beside her. He looked at the water. She looked at the water. The boat was still idling at the stern. "Vivian," she said, "warrant by morning." She signed the documents. Calloway named her in the cooperation statement. He paused. "It won't be fast, but it'll be real. And the organization behind the merger." A longer conversation for other rooms. "Brennan has what he needs to pull the thread." She breathed. "My accounts," she said. "The forgery is documented and witnessed. Calloway gave full cooperation on the construction. Harlan Voss is in custody. Wren got to him 4 blocks from the waterfront with the drive still on him." He looked at the water. "Your name gets cleared, not quickly enough, but completely." She stood there for a moment longer. The water moved. The city lights on the far shore scattered and suggested rather than illuminated. She thought about a conversation she was owed, about 6 weeks and a decision made without her knowledge, about the specific kind of trust that exists in alliances between people who operate in gray areas and what it requires and what it costs when it's violated. She thought about having that conversation. Soon. Not tonight, but soon. She turned away from the water and walked back toward the building, and behind her the Hudson continued without pause, and Lucien fell into step beside her, and neither of them said anything yet, because there were things that needed to be said, and a woman who had learned, in the past 10 days, to choose her moments carefully. But as she walked back across the lawn, and past the federal vehicles, and past the place where Raymond Cross had stood with his hands in his coat pockets 30 minutes ago, believing he had already won, as she walked through all of that, she felt something shift in her chest that was not relief, and not satisfaction, and not the clean resolution she'd been told resolution was supposed to feel like. It was something rawer than that, something that had no name yet because she hadn't lived on the other side of it long enough to name it. The estate was lit. The agents were moving. Brennan was on his phone and one of the federal vehicles had its lights running, and somewhere in the machinery of all of this, a man named Raymond Cross was beginning to understand what the rest of his life looked like. She found Damien sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the drive with a federal medic looking at the cut on his jaw. He looked up when she stopped in front of him. His eyes were exhausted and complicated, and she let them be both of those things without filling the space with something easier. "Marcus gave you the envelope," she said. "The fragments?" "Yes." "That took something. From him and from you." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you it squares what happened at the ceremony. It doesn't. But it mattered." He looked at her for a long moment. "What happens now? To me?" "You testify. Everything you know, everything you saw, everything Marcus told you. You do it fully and you do it early and you let Brennan's office determine what that's worth." She looked at him evenly. "You don't get to decide your own outcome. But the people who cooperate fully and honestly, they tend to land differently than the people who don't." "And us," he said. She looked at him for exactly the amount of time the question deserved. "There's no us, Damien," she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. "There's what you're going to do next and what I'm going to do next. Those are 2 separate things that happen to have been caused by the same event." She paused. "Get your jaw looked at properly. That needs stitches." She left him there and walked toward where Brennan was standing near the estate's main entrance. His phone down now, watching her approach with the expression of a man who has just witnessed several things he was not entirely certain how to categorize. "The drive Calloway provided," she said when she reached him. "The full 4 years. Is it sufficient?" "It's more than sufficient." He paused. "I want to ask you something." "Ask it." "The last 3 hours. The convoy. The dock." He looked at her carefully. "I authorized a federal response based on a call from a civilian at midnight. I need to understand who else was involved tonight and what their legal standing is because I have 14 people on this property whose names I don't have." "You'll have what you need," she said. "Everything that happened tonight produced evidence obtained within the bounds of what federal prosecutors can use. I made sure of that." She held his gaze. The people who helped me tonight operated in support of a federal case, not against it. That distinction matters, and I'll put it in writing tomorrow morning. Brennan studied her for a long moment. The kind of study that goes past the surface and comes back with something. You should have been a lawyer, he said. I should have been a lot of things, she said. I turned out to be this. She walked away from him and found a spot near the edge of the drive where the estate's exterior lights didn't quite reach, and she stood there in the dark, and she let herself feel the weight of the past 10 days for the first time without immediately converting it into action. The wedding, the elevator floor, the sidewalk and the shoes and the card with a name on it she hadn't known, the diner, the townhouse, the map she'd built from nothing, Gerald's silence, Priya's text, Damien's eyes in the anteroom, the splinter of doubt, the moment before he chose what he chose. Calloway on the phone at 2 a.m, Lucian and 6 weeks of a decision he'd made without telling her. That conversation was still coming. She hadn't forgotten it, and she wasn't going to pretend she had. But she was standing on the grounds of a Hudson estate at 2 a.m. with federal agents processing a scene and Raymond Cross in handcuffs and merger documents in a chain of custody bag, and she was standing there because she had refused, on a cold November sidewalk with no shoes and a canvas bag and nothing left to be finished. She breathed the November air in. Her lungs ached slightly from the run across the lawn. Her hands were steady. The cut of the cold on her face felt like the most real thing she'd experienced in weeks. Lucian appeared at her side. He stood slightly back, not crowding, just present. She'd learned to read his proximity as communication, and what this particular distance said was, "I'm here when you're ready." She turned and looked at him. The dock light behind him, the federal vehicles beyond, the estate and its expensive, careful architecture, and all the things it had been built to protect, all of it in the background, and Lucien Draven in the foreground, and the question she'd been carrying for 20 minutes still between them. 6 weeks, she said. Yes. You knew your organization had been compromised, and you made a tactical decision to leave the asset in place and manage what he saw. She watched his face. What did you let him see? Specifically. Lucian met her gaze without deflection. The financial analysis you were building, selectively. I let him see enough to confirm to Raymond that we were moving toward him, which kept Raymond moving forward with the merger rather than aborting it and going dark. If he'd aborted, the outside organization would have dissolved the U.S. operation and moved the assets offshore, and we'd have had nothing that could touch them. He paused. I let Harlan see enough of the picture to make Raymond feel like he was ahead of us. He wasn't. You used my work as controlled bait, she said again. Yes. And you decided not to tell me because you assessed that I would object. I assessed that telling you would change how you operated, and that the change would be visible to Harlan, and that visible change would signal to Raymond that we knew about the penetration. The integrity of the operation required you to work without that knowledge. He held her gaze. That was a decision I made on behalf of the outcome, not on behalf of our agreement. She looked at him for a long moment. The cold was settling deeper now, the kind that got into the joints. Behind her, she could hear Brennan's people moving, the sound of official processes grinding into motion, the machinery of accountability beginning its long, slow work. I told you, she said, that if I determined at any point that your organization had done something I couldn't stand next to, I walk. She paused. No retaliation. Lucian's expression didn't change. I remember. You agreed that the determination would be based on verified facts rather than rumor or discomfort. I did. She looked at the water visible beyond the dock, the Hudson moving without concern. She thought about the map she'd built and the operation that had run underneath it, and the outcome standing around her in the form of federal agents and secured evidence in a merger that would never file. She thought about what it meant to work alongside someone whose operational ethics were not identical to yours, but whose outcomes aligned with what you were trying to produce. She thought about what it meant to need that kind of alliance and what it cost to maintain it honestly. The outcome was what we needed, she said. The method was a violation of what we agreed. She looked back at him. I'm not walking. But we don't do this again. Not like this. Not without telling me what you know when you know it, regardless of what you think it'll do to my operational behavior. Her voice was quiet and specific and not asking for anything. I am not a resource you manage. I'm a partner you're accountable to. That's the only version of this that continues. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. 4. Agreed, he said. She nodded once. She looked at the property around her, the grounds, the lights, the boat still idling at the dock because no one had thought to cut its engine, and the black water of the Hudson beyond, and the far shore with its scattered lights, and the enormous indifferent sky above all of it. Everything that needed to happen tonight had happened. Everything that needed to be said after tonight had not been said yet, and there was a great deal of it, to Brennan, to attorneys, to a board that had suspended her access without a call, to a father who had chosen silence, to a maid of honor who had sent a text that deserved a real answer. And all of it was still ahead of her. All of it was the work of the weeks to come, slow and unglamorous, and not remotely resembling the compressed, adrenaline-fueled architecture of the past 10 days. She was not afraid of that work. She had learned in the past 10 days what she was made of when everything was stripped away, and the answer was something she had not previously been required to know and was now required to carry